Hey, Rebecca, sorry to interrupt you, but you've been muted. We were trying to let you know in the chat, but it wasn't going through.
That's the first time that's happened. Thank you all. Thank you all. Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and restart, and I apologize. Thank you. Well, hi everyone, for real this time. Welcome to St. Louis County Library's virtual program, National Radon Action Month, presented by the Missouri Lung Cancer Coalition. My name is Rebecca Clark, and I'm the manager of adult services at St. Louis County Library. Before we get started, I'll just share some tips about Zoom in case this is your first virtual program with us. We are live right now, and this program is being recorded. This is a webinar, so we cannot see or hear you. Also, this program is being captioned. To show captions, click the CC button on your Zoom panel near the chat box and select Show Subtitles. Stay tuned for more great programs from St. Louis County Library, including the virtual program Improve the Air Quality in Your Home. That will be presented by the American Lung Association on Thursday, February 24th at 2 p.m. Also, there's still time to register for the Winter Reading Challenge. We do have a virtual sign-in sheet for this program. Thank you so much for filling it out before you leave. Now, I'm happy to introduce one of today's presenters, Rachel Sanford. She's the coordinator of health promotions at the American Lung Association in Missouri. She will introduce every other panelist that's here with us tonight. Thank you so much for being here with us today, everyone. And thank you so much, Rachel, for letting me know I was muted. I'll let you take it away.
No worries, that happens to all of us. I am just going to share my screen. All right, and are you seeing it without my notes?
Indeed.
All right, thank you. All right, so thank you, Rebecca, for the introduction. Good evening and welcome to the National Radon Action Month workshop and panel discussion brought to you by the Missouri Lung Cancer Coalition. So January is National Radon Action Month, and our coalition is working to educate residents in Missouri on the dangers of radon and what you can do to protect yourself from exposure. As Rebecca mentioned, my name is Rachel Sanford, and I will be your presenter and panel moderator for tonight's presentation. As a thank you for your attendance, we will be sending free radon test kits to all attendees. In order to receive your free test kit, we will need you to fill out the Google form that Rebecca will be sharing to the chat. We'll share the link again at the end of the panel. Tonight, you will hear from radon experts and individuals who have been personally impacted by radon. We will begin by covering some basic information about radon. So these are the topics we're going to be covering. What is radon? How radon enters a building, radon and health risks, detecting radon and radon levels, the panelist discussion, and then a Q&A session. So what is radon? Radon is a colorless, tasteless, and odorless gas that causes lung cancer. Radon can reside at dangerous levels inside homes, schools, and other buildings. Radon-related lung cancers are responsible for an estimated 21,000 deaths annually in the United States, and exposure to radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States after smoking. Prolonged radon exposure is a serious health concern. So where does radon gas come from? Radon forms naturally. It comes from the natural breakdown of uranium in rocks and soil. The uranium breaks down to form radium, which then turns into radon gas. Once formed, radon enters a home through cracks in walls, basement floors, foundations, and other openings such as the water supply. And as radon decays, it releases radioactive byproducts that are inhaled and can cause lung cancer. Because radon comes from rock and soil, it can be found anywhere, including both old and new homes and construction. Exposure to limited concentrations like those found outdoors is impossible to avoid. However, when radon gets trapped indoors, it may exist in dangerous concentrations. Many people think that only old homes can have issues, but new homes that are sealed tight can actually trap radon even more. And this is another picture that just illustrates how radon can get into the home. You can see again through cracks in the foundation, the groundwater, windows, soil, radon in well water, through the shower. So there are really many ways that radon can enter the home or a building. And as far as radon and health risks, radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States and is responsible for thousands of deaths each year. Exposure to radon causes no immediate symptoms, but the long-term threat of lung cancer is significant to everyone. People who have never smoked make up approximately 2,900 of the estimated 21,000 radon-related lung cancer deaths each year. The health hazard comes from when radioactive particles are released when radon decays. These particles can be inhaled into the lungs and bombard your cells with dangerous cancer-causing radiation. Radon exposure and smoking can separately increase the risk of lung cancer, but if you smoke, know that exposure to both greatly enhances the risk of lung cancer. So why should you be concerned about radon? Every home should be tested for radon, and radon has been found at elevated levels in homes in every state, and the only way to know is to test. It's estimated that 33% of homes in Missouri have high radon levels. Your home can have elevated levels of radon while your neighbor's home does not, and testing is the only way to determine if you have a problem. Radon testing is easy and inexpensive, and it could save your life. Thousands of lung cancer deaths could be avoided each year if home and building owners acted to test and fix. So how can radon be detected? The only way to detect a buildup of radon in your home is to test the air. Various forms of do-it-yourself test kits and digital detectors are simple to use and inexpensive. And if you prefer, you can also hire a certified radon testing professional. The best way to find a certified professional is to contact your state radon program. The EPA also has an interactive map with contact information for state radon agencies. There are a couple different types of tests. Short-term tests typically take 2 to 7 days, but can sometimes take a few weeks for results. Long-term tests tend to be more accurate as they collect more data. They take at least 3 months and measure long-term averages. If you don't want to wait for a long-term test, short-term tests can indicate if your home has a problem and requires follow-up testing. So what about where and how to test? During this time, place the kit in a location where it will not be disturbed in the lowest level regularly used in your home. Follow the test directions and other official guidance to prevent problems that can affect testing. Digital detectors can also be purchased for your home and can provide short-term readings and establish an average for the long term. So what is a dangerous level of radon? Radon gas is measured in picocuries per liter of air, and the EPA recommends taking action to reduce radon if the result is 4 picocuries per liter or greater, and to consider similar actions when the radon level is between 2 and 4 picocuries per liter. The ultimate goal is to get your radon level to the lowest level possible. So how do you protect from radon entering your home? If you have an existing home with elevated levels of radon, you can fix the problem by having a radon mitigation system installed, which you can see in the picture. A radon mitigation system consists of a vent pipe, fan, and the proper sealing of cracks. This system collects radon gas from underneath the foundation and vents it to the outside of your home. If you need to have a radon mitigation system installed, it is best to contact a certified radon mitigation professional to do the installation. A list of certified professionals can usually be obtained by contacting your state radon program. And if you're building a new home, ask your contractor to install radon resistant features. These features include gravel and plastic sheeting below the foundation, along with proper sealing of cracks and the installation of a vent pipe. Once the radon-resistant features have been installed and the home is completely built, make sure to perform a radon test, as the levels could still be elevated. If the radon levels are still elevated, a radon fan should be added to the system to lower the radon level. All right, so now that we've covered an overview of radon, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Tonight, we are lucky to be joined by 4 wonderful panelists. Sherry Suma is the owner of St. Louis Radon Test and Mitigation, a certified radon testing and mitigation company, Vice President of the Heartland chapter of the American Association of Radon Scientists and Technologists, also referred to as ARST, a member of the Missouri Lung Cancer Coalition, and a member and board member of Lung Cancer Connection. As a graduate of the Missouri University of Science and Technology with a degree in geological engineering, a certified general contractor, and a licensed professional engineer in 4 states, including Missouri and Illinois, Sherry brings credentials and skills rarely seen in the radon mitigation industry. Jane Malone is the National Policy Director of ARST. Jane joined the ARST staff in 2015 to help advance federal, state, and local policies that will reduce radon risk. She has been involved with Healthy Homes policy advocacy for 2 decades, advising Congress, federal agencies, advocates, and jurisdictions. Heidi Naffman-Onda is co-founder of the White Ribbon Project, an organization dedicated to promoting awareness about lung cancer by changing public perception of the disease. Heidi is a lung cancer survivor and was diagnosed with stage 3A non-small cell lung cancer in October of 2018. Heidi seeks to encourage other lung cancer survivors and advocates to mobilize their efforts to increase awareness about lung cancer, change the public perception of the disease, and work to help improve prevention, early detection, and treatment of lung cancer. Don Gallagher is a member of the White Ribbon Project. Don is fighting stage 3B lung cancer, which has slowly metastasized. He's also a loving grandpa and husband. He's pictured here with his wife. He grew up on a farm and lives a healthy and active lifestyle. In fact, you may call him the epitome of health. He eats plant-based and even runs a vegan Instagram account called Grandpa Cooks Vegan. So we're going to start off with some questions about testing. So Sherry, are you there, Sherry?
I am.
Okay. So Sherry, should I test for radon on my own with a test kit or hire a professional?
Yes. Do either. If I could say 2 things tonight, it would be that radon-induced lung cancer is preventable, and the only way to know if you have elevated levels of radon in your home or building that you spend time is to test. Everyone on the call tonight, I believe, is getting a free radon test kit if they sign up for the form. The main differences are that, of course, if you hire a professional company to test, we have several years of experience and training. We know where and how to place the test. We know if your home needs more than one test placed. And the devices that we use are calibrated every year at least. The do-it-yourself kits are surprisingly accurate. They are very accurate. We get that question all the time because they're inexpensive. The tricky part is that you need to follow the directions to a T, and they're not hard to follow, but a lot of people don't realize how critical it is to get test results to follow those directions.
And what's the highest radon level that you've seen in the St. Louis area?
The highest level that we've seen in the St. Louis area is 419. And I think that's going to be shocking to most people on this call. They stop smoking 42 packs of cigarettes a day. it's another reason why every house should be tested. People, especially in Missouri, don't realize that we have radon levels that are that high. And it's a good reason to even, you talked earlier about short-term and long-term testing, Rachel, and it's a good argument that you should start, in my opinion, with a short-term test, because if you do a 48-hour test or 72-hour test and you have radon levels of 400, you're going to want to get that taken care of immediately. You're not going to want to wait 3 months, 6 months, or a year.
And when would you say is the best time of year to test for radon?
The best time, oh, and back to that question, obviously with 419, that was a test that we did at St. Louis Radon, and it was a house that we mitigated, and we got that house below 1 picocurie per liter. So just because the radon levels may be higher than what we average in the Missouri area doesn't mean it can't be effectively mitigated. But the best time to test kind of goes back to the do-it-yourself versus professional. Anytime is a good time to test. Radon levels tend to be 1 to 6 times higher in the winter. So now is a great time. January and February are great months to test. In fact, I always tell homeowners, if they're testing in the heat of the summer and they have borderline test results, something around 4, anywhere really between 3 and 4, I always recommend testing again in the winter.
And what areas of the home tend to have the highest concentrations of radon?
Radon is the heaviest gas. It's the heaviest noble gas. And so the areas radon emanates from the ground. And so the areas of the home with the highest level of concentrations are going to be your basement. They're going to be the part of your house that may be on a slab, if you have a slab home or an addition on a slab, or if your house is built on a crawl space or has certain rooms on a crawl space. Those are going to be the rooms above the crawl space, the room on the slab, and the basement are going to be the highest concentrations of radon in your home.
And what about this one? So I have a new home with no noticeable cracks or gaps where radon could enter. Do I still need to test my home?
Absolutely. It's a common myth, a common misconception that new houses don't have radon. Radon can build up in a house in 12 hours after it's complete. Newer homes are, I think you might have mentioned this earlier, they're more efficient. There's less fresh air coming into a new home a lot of times. And in addition to that, there's rock now under new houses. And so there's more air passageways and it's easier for radon to be sucked into your house. Even though you might not see cracks, it doesn't take large openings. It doesn't take large cracks for radon to get into your house. And I've never seen concrete that didn't crack. Of course, they put expansion joints in homes. Radon can come up from a sump. So yes, absolutely. Not only every type of house needs to be tested and should be tested. I don't know if you mentioned this, but you should be testing your house every 2 years or anytime you make any alterations to your house. And that's going to include adding a sump, adding any kind of drainage system in the basement, installing a new HVAC system, getting new windows, anything that can change the pressure in your house should initiate another radon test.
All right, so now we're going to move to some questions about mitigation. So what's involved in radon mitigation?
Radon mitigation is, we basically install a piping system that pulls the air from underneath your slab and vents it to the outside. So we're going to core drill a hole in your basement slab, excavate some material underneath to create airflow. We're going to seal that, put a PVC pipe in it, seal it. That will go to the outside of the house, typically through the band board, where we'll install on the outside an inline fan, which creates the vacuum that pulls the gas. And that fan goes above the roof line and vents the radon outside. There's another kind of system. In some cases, we can install that pipe from the basement through the garage and install the fan in your attic and vent it above the roof line.
And what does it usually cost to install a mitigation system?
A radon mitigation system is actually one of the least expensive home improvements that you can make in your home, and it's potentially life-saving. They are typically under $1,100.
Great. All right. And is there anything else that you want folks to know about testing and mitigation that we haven't covered?
Just like I said earlier, radon-induced lung cancer is preventable. Testing is inexpensive. In some cases, testing can be free through programs like this. And mitigation systems are too. Mitigation systems also pull any kind of soil gas from underneath your slab, not just radon, and they pull moisture from underneath your slab, which can reduce mold. So go test, 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 test.
Great. Thank you very much, Sherry.
Mhm.
All right. So now we are going to hear from Jane Malone.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, good. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, you're fine. So we'd like to know about what you do for ARST.
Yeah, well, first I want to say what ARST is, if that's okay. So
Sure.
The American Association of Radon Scientists and Technologists is a nonprofit professional organization of members dedicated to the highest standard of excellence and ethical performance of radon measurement, mitigation, transformation for the benefit of members, consumers, and the public at large. And I'm the National Policy Director. I lead efforts to make policy happen, policy advocacy happen at the national and state levels.
And what have you implemented with other states?
Well, I just want to say the number one priority for the Arts Government Affairs program is to help make state policy more protective. We do what we can at the federal level, but the states are where the action is. You've got the power at the state level in Missouri to make things happen that will never happen in Washington, D.C. So we're working at any given point in time with a dozen states, typically through a chapter of ARST, a chapter of our organization, which includes mostly radon professionals, and we're helping those professionals to work with their partners in their states on policy change. So just as an example, this week I'm helping the New York Radon Task Force as they put the final touches on their draft legislation that they're going to eventually send back to the legislature. And I'm also helping Colorado to figure out how they can make the next step since they passed a regulations and certification program in 2001. So one type of policy is protecting families from ineffective and unprotected work. And that consists of regulating radon professionals, which includes prohibiting radon work by anybody who's untrained or uncredentialed. And it also includes requirements for adherence to the current radon standards. Only 20 states require certification or licensing. Half of those states rely on the current standards exclusively. The other 10 have a mishmash. This includes some expired standards. So think of radon standards as driving laws. Not obeying these can put yourself and others at risk. If you're going to test or have someone test, you need to make sure to do it right. And if someone's going to mitigate your home, they need to not only be certified, but also follow the standards. And then I could just talk about some other kinds of policies, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know how we are with time.
We're good.
Equally important are other policies, like the examples are ones that notify people who are buying a home through a warning statement that includes encouragement of testing before purchasing. 9 states have this policy, and a couple of other states are when I say states, I mean people in these states are working on, like Colorado is going to try to work on that kind of law next. And a couple other states, Pennsylvania, are talking about it. Another kind of policy that's a protective is requiring radon systems in new homes, which exists in 11 states, requiring radon systems in new schools, that exists in 9 states, and also just simply requiring testing of any new building after it's built, whether a system was put in the first place or not. Why should that home or school be occupied for the very first time if it has a high radon level? We wouldn't let that happen with something like carbon monoxide or another poison. And then another policy type is mandating policies in existing buildings, like existing schools and existing childcare facilities. So there are a few states that require testing and then mitigation needed in those kinds of buildings where our children, go day in and day out, where our teachers have to work all day. Those buildings are the focus in some states. Although much progress has been made, there remains room for policy improvement in every state. Even though I just listed all those places that have these policies I talked about, they still all have room to grow in terms of what they're doing. And so I just want to say that I'm personally looking forward to working with the Lung Association, Lung Cancer Connection, St. Louis Radon, Missouri Department of Health and Human Services, and everyone else involved in the Lung Cancer Coalition, which really put together this panel tonight. I really think good things can happen here, and I'm looking forward to helping with that.
Absolutely. And so that's a good segue into our next question. So what suggestions do you have for us to implement similar work in Missouri?
So one of the things that our committee, our Government Affairs Committee, and our board has thought about is that before you start implementing protections, you probably ought to have a policy in place that prevents the wrong people from doing the work. If you put into place a law that says, for example, schools have to be tested and mitigated, and then anybody, can walk in with a tape measure and a ladder and do that work, and there's no protection from being so that's one way to think about this, is maybe regulation is a first step. On the other hand, that may feel big and complicated. I mean, one of the low impact policies that people have looked at around the country is, well, we can't require testing very easily. That's going to be really controversial, requiring testing of buildings when they're sold, for example. But what about that notification where, and by the way, some of the people who are on this call probably know, because you've bought a home, that there's such a thing called as disclosure of hazards and disclosure of risk. And that's like in existence in most states. That's like no big thing. Like it's not it's not really very much if they just have to tell you whether or not they tested. What's better is if when you're buying that home or you're going to rent an apartment, someone tell you before you sign that contract or that lease that there's a possibility of radon in this building and it should be tested, and you should get the place tested maybe before you move into it. We find in other states that if that kind of warning is provided to home buyers, most people will get that building tested. Now things are shifting a little bit with the housing market right now, where people are rushing around buying things and they're not getting home inspections. And so that's sort of kind of messing up that radon protection piece. But we're hoping that's going to settle down and that everybody's going to calm down and, buy or rent houses at a more slow pace, so they've got the time to get that test done before they move. But there's, as Sherry said, you can test anytime. So let's say that didn't happen, you didn't have a home inspection. Still, that first week when you move into that house, you could be calling to get it tested or getting a do-it-yourself test kit. Sorry, I'm babbling on here.
No, you're great. We appreciate it. All right. And do you have anything else you'd like to mention to us about policy, about your work with ARST?
No. Oh, well, you're going to get a handout from the library later, and it's going to be the brand new ARST radon report card for Missouri. And there you're going to see on one page a description of radon related cancer risk in Missouri, as well as what proportion of homes are testing above 4. 4 picocuries was mentioned. You want to make sure that if your radon level is above 4, you need to do something about that. And also on that sheet is a description of the possible policies like the ones I just mentioned. And unfortunately, that part of the Missouri sheet doesn't look too great, but onward and upward. So do look at that report card along with the other handouts that they're going to provide you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jane. All right, so now we are going to hear from Heidi. Heidi, are you ready?
I am ready. Hi. Thank you
Hello.
for having this, public service announcement, basically. at the state level. I'm so grateful to see this happening, and I do question why there has never been, that I'm aware of anyway, a national public health service announcement about radon. I knew nothing about it. I have a master's degree in health education, so I've taught public health education, worked with the HIV/AIDS community in Los Angeles in the early 90s. My husband is a primary care physician, and I'm also a fitness trainer for 20 years, still doing that virtually though. And we had no clue that anyone with lungs could get lung cancer. Thought that didn't have a history of smoking, so it wasn't one of the cancers I needed to worry about. And in October of 2018, I basically had no respiratory symptoms whatsoever. I was having another, health issue followed up, and my doctor ordered a CT scan of my chest, abdomen, and pelvis just to rule out, cancer from an ovary. And when I got back was, well, your ovary looks fine, but there's a mass in the upper left lobe of your lung, and you have some swollen lymph nodes in the middle of your chest. One thing led to another, and I was diagnosed with stage 3A adenocarcinoma of the lung, told I had 4 to 6 months to live because I was not operable. Could not believe what I was hearing because I felt great. I felt fine. I never became short of breath, never coughed, nothing like that. And when we had to break this news to our children, who are all grown and they live in different parts of the country, my son, who's the oldest, is an environmental engineer. And the first thing he asked me, because these kids grew up never eating fast food, always being active, he wanted to know what the radon level of the house was. And I told him, the what? I mean, what is that? I don't know what you're talking about. We're from California. We moved here in 1994, moved to this house in 1998, never heard about radon. So he gave us a quick education. We had the house tested, and the level was an 8. So I know that's not 400, but the first thought that came into my mind was that my children were in the basement a lot. They were there as, preschoolers, toddlers, babies. When they became teenagers, it was the teenage hangout, and they were down there all the time. I maybe went down there occasionally to pick it up and clean it up. But 2 years prior to my diagnosis, when we became empty nesters, we turned it into a gym. And I was down there 7 days a week, doing my own cardio, at least an hour, huffing and puffing. And then 2 years later, I'm diagnosed with, basically, I'm told, terminal lung cancer. Good news for me is I'm doing well. I'm more than 3 years out, and I'm very, very grateful. We had the house mitigated right away, and the level came down to, I want to say, like a 1.9. I've still been terrified to go down to the basement. I'm not afraid to go down there to pick something up, but definitely not spending any time exercising down there or watching a movie or anything. My son recommended, you have a recommendation of every 2 years test. We're very paranoid. We test once a year. We just tested with our short term, and it was a 1.1. Still terrified to go down there. And my husband has the long-term one running as well. So we will just keep doing this. And it, like you said, it's preventable. This doesn't need to happen. And, I would love to see a national campaign. I mean, why isn't this on everybody's radar? It should be. And the other question I have in my head is, we're told by American Cancer Society and other organizations that it's the second leading cause of lung cancer in people who smoke, but it's actually the first leading cause of lung cancer in people who have never smoked. And they're guesstimating 20,000 deaths per year. How do we know that number isn't actually a lot higher? Because my doctor hasn't documented my radon level in my chart. How do we know that this number isn't much, much bigger? So not to be an alarmist, but let's just, keep people healthy. I love the mission here. I would love to see this everywhere. That's all. And again, I am so grateful for the work that you're doing. Thank you. Thank you for putting this out there. And if this is recorded and available for us to be able to show, people in our state. I'm in Colorado, so I'm happy to hear things are happening here, but we've got to see it everywhere.
Yeah. And would you tell us a little bit about the White Ribbon Project?
Sure. So the White Ribbon Project, I'll show you one right here. It's right up and close here. It's a 2-foot by 4-foot plywood white ribbon. And this developed over in October of 2020. I became very frustrated that approaching my cancer center and other advocates across the country approaching theirs, asking, what are you going to do for Lung Cancer Awareness Month in November? And basically getting brushed off or ignored or humiliated. I was given a very humiliating response from my cancer center telling me that the color is white for lung cancer, in case you didn't know, but they have white lights in their parking lot that they turn on every night, and their doctors wear white coats. And so therefore they are acknowledging lung cancer awareness every day of the year. And I blew a gasket, had a meltdown after that. And I just screamed at my husband, who had taken up woodworking when I was first diagnosed as kind of an outlet for him. And I just said, I wish you would make me a big white ribbon out of wood so I can put it on my front door and scream that I have lung cancer. I am not ashamed of this at all. And we need to educate people. And it's a pandemic. Who's going to come to my door? I don't know, the mailman at least, or, the delivery person. But I felt like I had some control in that after, having that outburst. My husband made this within an hour. My daughter ended up sending me a more professional looking label, which took a week to get there. And in the meantime, I had taken some pictures and put it on a Facebook, private Facebook page for the lung cancer advocates in Colorado. And I said, look, we haven't been treated well, but we're not powerless. I mean, we can do something on our own, and we each have voices. And they started asking, and I also tied white ribbons around my trees and my mailbox. And I said, you can do something. And what I got back was, well, what's on the front door there? And would your husband make one for me? We did that. Long story short, we've made over 3,000 ribbons. They're all across the country. We're in 70 cancer centers. We have some home inspection agencies have called and asked us, and they're promoting it now with their Radon Awareness Month in January. And we are in 28 countries, industry partners. We're very excited about this to help us get the word out. We are totally grassroots. We're in the process of becoming a 501c3 that should be coming through soon. We had, our last question to answer for that. And so once that's there, we, can maybe expand a little quicker, because right now it's pretty much just me and my husband making these ribbons. Don actually hosted a ribbon build this summer in Kansas, but I think he may be out of ribbons now, and it's winter. It's hard for people to do them. So we welcome you to go to our website, thewhiteribonproject.org. And if you are interested in having a ribbon, they're no charge, but understand that we're slow, and we'll get you one as soon as you come up on the waiting list. So it's a voice, it's a movement, it's a lung cancer movement for any type of lung cancer. It doesn't matter if you smoked, if you didn't, young, old, mutation, no mutation, we're all lung cancer, and we're all in this together.
And thank you so much for all of your work. And I was just wondering if there was one other thing you wanted to tell the group that you hope that they remember.
Well, I hope that they remember that they can test their homes. Don't be afraid to test your home. I've heard people say, I don't want to know, because does it mean my house has to be condemned, or I'll never be able to sell it or anything? And no, it's a reasonable cost. My house is about 5,000 square feet, counting the basement. It was $900 to fix this. And the other thing I want people to know is, like you said, even if you have a mitigation, please still test. I have friends who said to me, Heidi, I can't believe you didn't know about radon. You're Miss Consumer Reports, blah, blah, blah. And we have, and I said, well, do you test? Oh, no, we built our house. We don't have to do that. Or we have a mitigation system. All of those friends retested, and they all went from higher than mine. So the lowest one was a 9, and the highest one was a 26. And they are all like, now testing, remitigating, getting their mitigator service. And as my son taught me, he said, mitigation, yeah, we get it down, but understand it's like any other appliance. It could start malfunctioning, not quite working right, or it could just stop working. And so you need to be on it. It's something that is preventable, and it's cost effective. It's worth it. Our lives are worth it.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. All
Thank
right.
you. I appreciate you giving me a seat at.
All right, so Don, are you still with us?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. So tell us about how radon has impacted you.
Well, it's radically changed my life. I'm pretty confident it was radon. I'll give you my short story. So in 2019, in the fall, I was coughing quite a bit, mainly when I was talking. And so actually it started late summer in 2019, and I went to my primary care physician, got some antibiotics, didn't do anything. I figured it was just an infection in my lungs. Tried another antibiotic, didn't work. At that point, he said, I think you need to go see a pulmonologist. So that's what I did. And they did a CT scan, and there was something there. And they did a biopsy. And at that point, it was confirmed that I had adenocarcinoma. It was staged at 3B at the time. I had never smoked in my life. Was very healthy. So it was quite a surprise, to say the least, because I was one of those people that thought you had to smoke to get lung cancer. And at that time, I had no idea what role radon might have played in my cancer. Although I will say, we live in a house here in Olathe, Kansas, and when we moved here in 2001, we did get it tested, and a mitigation system was put in. Although I'll say I didn't know what that was about. I didn't know that radon caused cancer. I just knew that radon was bad and we needed to have a system, so we put that in. But so that was the beginning of my journey, and I immediately had surgery. I had chemo, then I had radiation. That was on into the summer of or spring of 2020. We were hoping that that would take care of everything and I would move on and not have to deal with cancer anymore. But I had a recurrence a year ago, this past December. The cancer came back. And at that point, excuse me, we had to look for some sort of, chemo or immunotherapy or some sort of targeted drug. Luckily, there was a new drug that was coming on the market that I was able to tap into. It was a match to my cancer mutation. And I got on it in April, and it was a lifesaver. That was this past year. But it didn't last very long, only about 7 months. So, and during the time that I was on it, unfortunately, my cancer metastasized, and I now have a number of cancer lesions, primarily in areas of my upper body, my right femur. I've had some radiation, but as I sit here, as I told you all, I'm in a lot of pain. Bone pain is really something else that I had never experienced before, but we're working to battle it as best we can. It's been a little over 2 years now, still a survivor. Hoping we can keep this up for quite a while. I have a lot of, all my family is here. We have 3 grandsons, and so there's a lot to stay alive for. But just a comment to radiation, radon. What happened for me is last year, I was back at one of the farms that I grew up on in Iowa, having a conversation with the guy who had purchased it in May of 2020, and he had it tested, and he told me that it tested at the highest level he'd ever seen, and he was in construction. Iowa has very high levels of indoor radiation due to the geology. And of course, when I was growing up there, I grew up in 2 different rural homes just 4 miles apart. We didn't know anything about radon and weren't testing. And I have a suspicion. I mean, when he told me that story, the light bulb went off. I just assumed that that's probably how I got my cancer. And it's unfortunate, but that's life sometimes. But that's kind of my story. I really appreciate what this program is doing. People, gosh, so many people don't understand what radon is. They don't understand how, it's a killer. For me, it's it's a killer that's kind of been in hiding for so long, just working inside my body. And then finally it showed up 2 years ago. So I really encourage people to listen to what's being said here tonight and get your house or your living space tested. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Don, for being here and for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
All right. So with that, we'll conclude our panel. Here is the Google form link that you will need to fill out in order to receive a free radon test kit. It'll also be shared in the chat, shared in the follow-up email, but we will need you to fill out the form in order to share that with you. And we really hope that you enjoyed this panel and learned about radon. Now it's time to take action and test your home for radon. Testing is the only way to know if your home has radon. Thank you for attending, and I will now turn it back over to Rebecca to moderate the question and answer session.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you to everyone in attendance. And of course, thank you to our panelists today. We've gotten already some great questions, a lot of questions, and we so appreciate that everyone's here and is sharing all these really important questions. I think one of the comments was we're all in the dark here. And I think these questions sort of point that there is a lot for us to learn regarding radon. So I'm going to go ahead and get to some of these questions. Some of them have been answered already in the chat box, but I just like to address them here on Zoom, especially since this program is going to be recorded, and I'd like everyone to have access to this information. So one of the questions was, if you have a positive test, should you disclose it on a seller's disclosure? And should you also disclose whether a mitigation has been completed? Sherry, I think you sort of answered that in the chat box. Do you mind sort of restating that here for everyone?
Sure. Yes, it's required in the state of Missouri on the standard disclosure statement to tell if you have had a test and what the test results are, and also disclose if your house has a radon mitigation system.
Mm-hmm. Another question was, does radon level, does it typically change in your house over time? And should you retest at some frequency? So I think from the presentation, it was mentioned that in the winter months, it's at the highest level, I believe, and that you should retest at some frequency. Can you speak more to that, Sherry?
Sure. Radon levels fluctuate weekly, daily, hourly, seasonally. So yes, they do fluctuate, and that's why we do at least a 48-hour test, and we average that data over that period of time. Again, you should test every 2 years. Like Heidi said, even if you have a radon mitigation system, you should still be testing every 2 years. During a real estate transaction, if you're thinking about purchasing a house and you're going through the home inspection period, again, you should be testing that house, even if there's a radon mitigation system. And another thing to look for during a home inspection of a house that has a mitigation system is, especially in the state of Missouri, where we're not required to be certified and licensed, is the system installed to code. There are systems out there, unfortunately, that have been installed. I think somebody asked this question, that have been installed and not tested after the installation of the radon mitigation system. And you don't know if a radon mitigation, we can do everything right when we install a radon mitigation system, but sometimes we just don't reduce the levels to under 4, which is the EPA action level, the first time with one mitigation system. So there's no way to know if your house has elevated levels of radon without testing. So there are occurrences where we test after installing the mitigation system, and we might have to go back and modify the system in some way.
Mm-hmm. You said like adding a fan potentially, right?
Well, there's always a radon mitigation fan, except in, I think Jane was talking about passive radon systems with new construction. So if you buy a house without a fan, you should definitely be testing once you move in to see if you need to activate it basically and install a radon fan. But if we go out and install a radon mitigation system and retest it, our systems all have fans on them because they're in existing houses. But sometimes we can upgrade the fan. We can put a different type of fan on it. Sometimes, and this is a little bit in the weeds for probably a lot of people that are listening, but we can install a second suction point, pull air from another part of the basement. And sometimes, depending on the house, it might take two systems if the house is exceptionally large.
Mhm. Another question regarding testing is, should you put the test near the furnace or far away from the furnace, or does it make a difference?
It can make a difference. I would recommend putting it at least 10 feet away from a furnace. These are the kinds of things where it kind of difference between testing yourself and using a professional. But yes, put it away from a furnace. It should be 3 feet from a wall with a window. It should be at least a foot from a foundation wall. Make sure that you don't have a vent blowing on it. What are some of the other things? It needs to be at least 20 inches off the ground when you place a radon test. So location does matter. That's a great question.
Mhm.
Can I just add to that?
Sure,
You
Jane.
know, so there are test kits out there, and there's some reliability, but I just would comment that the kind of instructions you get with a test kit, and I don't mean to disrespect anybody who sells those, but they're not as thorough in the instructions as the standard that Sherry follows or another radon professional follows, so that there's a possibility of missing out by putting it at the wrong spot, and we've certainly seen horror stories. So
that's a
Yeah.
great point. And just to kind of drive that home with the instructions, it's great to use those do-it-yourself test kits, but sometimes if you don't do them properly, you might get test results that aren't accurate and that would typically show a lower radon level than you actually have. One thing that we see a lot of or hear a lot of from people that call to get mitigation systems is they didn't seal the bag right away. I had a lady pop in here because she thought we were a lab one day. And I said, would you mind showing me your test kit? And it was open and she had been driving around with it in her car. So had she not popped in here to talk to us, she would have sealed it and put it in the mail, and the test results wouldn't have been accurate. Another kind of example is if you have a house with, let's say, a crawl space, and you have a house with a basement and you only test the basement and the basement is low and you never end up talking to a professional, you're not going to know that, well, you may not know, depending how educated you are on the topic, that you should have tested above the crawl space. And there are times when parts of the house are high and parts of the house are low. The same goes for houses that are large. We tested on a house that was 8,000 square feet. It was a ranch. The basement was 8,000 square feet. We put 4 radon tests in it. 3 of them were all above 10 and 1 of them was below 4. So had we just picked the location, or somebody that was doing it themselves that didn't know it required more than 1 test, had they put it in the location that was low, they would have thought they didn't have an issue. So following the instructions, even though they may not be perfect, is super critical. So thanks for pointing that out, Jane.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you. Another question regarding what kind of buildings should be tested. There were questions that came in saying, should apartments be tested, schools, workplaces? And in the chat, I know you mentioned that, like, yes, of course, all those things. But can you speak more to how to ensure that those are tested?
Well, unfortunately, you typically have to rely on the building owner, right? But yes, any indoor space that you spend time should be tested. In fact, and this is getting maybe a little beyond what we have time for, but HUD structures are required to be tested now. So yes, apartments, if you live in an apartment, even though you don't own it, you could still test for radon. And I would recommend that, at least if you're on the first 3 floors. And then typically you can go to the building, the apartment owner, and they're going to install a radon system for you. In a condo situation, you typically own the condo and you're responsible for the testing and the mitigation. But, you know, radon doesn't discriminate any buildings, and you want to be exposed to the lowest levels over the shortest period of your time. And that includes your workplace. It includes your kids' daycare. It includes their school. So ask your boss, ask your kids' daycare provider, call the superintendent, ask what the school's been tested.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Another question, I think it was mentioned, but Jane, I think you mentioned that some states don't require a lot of regulation for these radon companies. And did you say that Missouri was one of those states?
Yeah, Missouri is among the 30 states that have no requirements. Now that said, as Sherry said earlier, you know, there are these national certification programs, and a number of people in Missouri are certified through the National Radon Proficiency Program, but there's no law requiring that they do that. And you know, at any point in time, people are vulnerable to someone just coming in with with, you know, buying a few test kits online and knocking on your door and saying, "Let me test for you," you know.
Yeah.
And
So, oh, sorry,
it's no
Sherry.
different. Well, it's no different than any other professional, right? You'd want to hire a licensed electrician, and here we're dealing with something that's cancer causing. So to me, it's just as or even more important. You know, when you install a radon system, you're drilling holes in people's roof, people's siding, people's brick. So you want to, you know, you want to use people that are highly trained.
Mhm. And you mentioned that you can become a professional, of course, like a licensed professional. How does one do that, and how can
So-
we find out who is one?
Yeah, so well, first of all, the Missouri State Department of Health and Human Services has on its website a link that shows they're required by their funding from EPA to show, you know, to basically provide information to guide people to one of the two certification programs, National Radon Proficiency Program and National Radon Safety Board. What's involved in getting credentialed is people need to attend training and apply for and pass a test and apply for you know, certification, pay a fee for that. And you know, someone can get certified in the space of, you know, a couple, 3-6 months. But the important part is not just the book learning, memorizing the standard, but also really working with someone else, with another business or whatever, to really hone the skills and know what you're doing. That there's lifelong learning in mitigation, which is why people have these credentials have continuing education requirements. They have to get, you know, more education in every single year. The states that have requirements for credentials, around half of them, basically you rely on the National Proficiency Program. So basically, if you go through this private program over here, the state will and you show that to the state will give you the state credential. And that's become kind of the wave of the future for how these people are regulated. Having a whole state bureaucracy and writing state-specific regs and state-specific tests and so on, that's the thing of the past. And a number of states near Missouri did that, have this whole set of state-specific rules. You don't need to do that in Missouri now that we've got the process down. You could just have a program that issues the credentials if they pass the requirements of the certification program.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Thank you. Another question came in, how much is a professional inspection? And thank you, Sherry, for adding that in the chat. St. Louis Radon charges $130 for a radon test, a professional inspection. But again, everyone that fills out that form will get a free test in the mail. A question came in regarding when can we expect those tests? So Rachel, can you let us know more about that?
Yep. So about 2 to 3 weeks. We're a pretty small team, so bear with us while we get those out.
Excellent. Excellent. And then Sherry, is St. Louis Radon certified by anyone?
Yes, we are certified. We're certified by NRPP and ARST, and then we are also certified by IEMA, which is the Illinois Emergency Management Association. Illinois has their own required certification.
Great. And since we did start just a, little bit late. Is everyone okay with sticking around just a couple more minutes to answer a few more questions?
Sure.
Sure. And I
Okay.
want to add that there are 2 people who have their hands up in the attendees. And I think those people, if you want to put something in the chat, that's the way to get an answer to your question.
Yes. Thank you, Jane. Yes. Anyone feel free to add your questions there. So one question was, are houses on a slab that have no basement more at risk for high radon levels in the main living areas of the home?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's kind of a myth. You'd be surprised how many people think you have to have a basement to have a radon problem. But that gentleman or lady that asked that question it was exactly right, because radon comes from the ground and your main living area is right next to the ground where radon levels are the highest.
Got it. And then are there specific areas of St. Louis County that generally have either higher risk or lower risk for radon? What's the general region's risk?
I always hesitate to answer this question because I don't want people to think, oh, she said Imperial has higher levels of radon than St. Charles County, for example, and then they think they don't need to test. And you know, I know we've said test, but you really do need to. St. Louis City has a little bit lower levels of radon than St. Louis County. St. Charles County has a little bit higher radon levels than St. Louis County. Jefferson County a little bit higher than that. But we're all kind of in the 25 to 35% of homes range. And so to me, that's pretty prevalent in the whole area. And I think Jane brought this up. The CDC just recently came out and said they've updated the numbers to 33%, and the entire state of Missouri is the average.
And just to add to that, there are these old EPA maps based on a survey that's like 30 years ago. And it was a really limited survey. And everybody means well at EPA, but it's outdated information. So this new CDC Data Explorer, Environmental Public Health Tracking Network, that they have more current, it's solely based on radon tests, whereas the EPA thing from 30 years ago was based on some guesswork. These are actual radon tests. And actually, you can go to CDC EPHT and look it up. And the important thing to think about when you look at that tool like that is that the old way of thinking was to talk about average radon levels. Well, averages hide the extremes. So if the county's like slightly below 4, but there's a bunch of houses that are 20 in that average, then the county's not safe, you know? So you don't want to go with averages. You want to be looking at actual radon tests more and more as the way to think about radon risk.
Yes, thank you, Jane. And before we sort of wrap this up, Heidi, I just want to point out like the number of comments that we got after your portion of today's program. We just so thank you for your passion and all that you're doing with your project. And I'll be sure to share more information about the White Ribbon Project in my follow-up email.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Could someone put the instructions also in that email, like where to put the test so people know if the instructions that this test is coming with may not be accurate, what your standard is?
Yes, that's a good idea. Rachel, will the test kit include good instructions?
So Laura is actually more familiar with our test kits and what they look like. I don't know if Laura can quickly. Yes, it will include instructions.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Well, and in my follow-up email, we shared a lot of links in the chat box today. So I'll be sure to include a lot of that information in my follow-up email. And then in that follow-up email, it'll include a link to the recording that's posted on YouTube. And feel free to share that with folks anywhere. Like Heidi, she's joining us from Colorado. So anyone across the world can watch our recordings. And if you haven't already, thank you so much for filling out that virtual sign-in sheet. The information is especially helpful to our partners. And make sure to also fill out that form to get your free radon testing kit. I'll add those again in the chat box and sort of stay on for a couple minutes, as gives some more people a chance to fill those both out. But I want to thank everyone in attendance, all of our panelists today, for a great event all about this public health issue. So thank you all. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Is it just panelists? It's just you two? Hello?